Welcome to the second episode of The Diplomat. And before we talk about democracy, we have to be honest about something. Some of the biggest threats to democracy are not coming always from the outside. They're coming from the inside, slowly, legally, and quietly. Today, I'm speaking with Joonathán Katz. He leads the Anti-Corruption, Democracy, and Security Project at the Brookings Institute in Washington, D.C. What does he focus on? How democracies fall apart, one law, one agency, one silence at a time. Right now, we're watching something strange. Moldova's building forward, and some would say that Ukraine just rolled back key reforms. Tunisia's collapsed into near authoritarian rule. And in the middle of all this, strategic corruption is becoming a foreign policy tool. This is not about theory, it's about power. So Joonathán, let's start here. Thank you for being with us. People keep saying that democracy is resilient, but we're watching governments removing watchdogs institution and also pass laws that let them sideline anti-corruption agencies. Is democracy actually holding up, or we're just not seeing how fast things are slipping?
So I think in this case, we've seen what we would call backsliding, democracy backsliding globally. It's not because of democracy per se. That's the system. It's typically leadership, where you find countries where there are those that are in power seeking to strengthen their hold on power that abuse democracy. You see erosions of democracy. And you've seen it in places where you have even sparks of democracy.
Let's have some case studies. Let's look at two examples, Moldova and Ukraine. Moldova is holding the line. Reforms are moving forward. Civil society is engaged. There is a clear path toward the EU. But Ukraine, while still at war, just passed a law that weakens its key anti-corruption institutions, and the president signed it the same day. Why would a country under attack, fighting for survival, take steps that make its institutions weaker?
Yeah, well, there's I think in two things. Ukraine, one, Moldova is an example of a country that's overcome sort of decades of under communist rule, and then even post-independence also face remnants of a system that was not democratic. And through the election of now President Maya Sandu, and then we've had two elections and then parliamentary elections, they've elected a government that is supportive of, you're right, integrating with the EU, meeting democratic standards, addressing corruption challenges. There's still more that they need to do to move in that direction, but they've had the right type of governance. They have made a decision, despite the best efforts of Russia and those internally, to turn Moldova back closer to Russia and away from democratic progress. The people there stood up and they voted in a specific way. It's the same thing in Ukraine, too. When you look at polling, ask Ukrainians what they want. Ukrainian citizens strongly support a democratic future. They want integration into the European Union. They want corruption addressed. And since the Maidan in 2014, when the previous government led by Yanukovych left, they have made significant steps forward in the anti-corruption space.
But do you think crisis or the war is being used as a cover to push through power grabs in Ukraine?
I think in this instance that law, I think it was certainly a step backwards. The reason, one of the reasons why the government came back and sort of went back in and said no to that legislation was because of the strong effort of civil society within Ukraine. Ukrainians standing up across the country saying, no, don't do this. So there was a response, and that certainly was, I think we can all say, was a mistake by the government to move in that direction. I don't think, when you look at the current Ukrainian government, you could certainly say there's a consolidation of power, at the presidency, because they're in the middle of a war, a pretty significant war with a leading global power. But at the same time, there are checks and balances within the country, and we can see on their path to EU membership that they have taken pretty significant steps forward, some which we have documented at the Brookings Institution as steps to address key areas of corruption. So there's a lot of people who worked on Ukraine's democracy for many years, but it doesn't mean that there aren't going to be mistakes. And it doesn't mean, I think, as you pointed out, which is rightfully so, there are others that want to consolidate power, take advantage of the system, whether it's economic or political or for other reasons. And in all the backsliding democracies that you see globally, maybe those that have been democracies, those moved back or nascent, like we'll talk about Tunisia too, corruption becomes a major issue, or consolidation of power struggles. And it doesn't mean from the United States to anywhere globally, these become major issues and major challenges in many countries. So I think, every country is different. So we're seeing those challenges everywhere.
Let's shift to something that you have written about: strategic corruption. Not just local bribery, but a tool used by foreign powers to weaken governments or by influence and shift alliances. Are Europe and its allies treating this like the serious threat it is, or are we still stuck in workshops and white papers while the problem keeps growing?
Governments are, as you pointed out too, talking about sort of, corrupt governments that take resources to enrich themselves, at the disadvantage of populations. I mean, we can point to, sort of countries in the MENA region, Africa, in the United States, elsewhere. Nobody's immune from this. But what we've seen globally is efforts by governments to put in place infrastructure, rule of law, court systems, checks and balances, so that you have guardrails that prevent fraud and abuse by governance. What you also have is an effort to address foreign interference and bribery. And for the United States, this has been an issue where we've dealt with foreign bribery for many years, making certain that American companies weren't paying bribes abroad, making certain that money isn't laundered, that comes from, for example, from Russia to a country in any, you name the place in the world, and ends up in U.S. banks, that we are not, the United States has been home to dirty money, significant amounts of dirty money. And what you saw was an effort by the United States Congress, bipartisan, to say no more. We're going to pass what's called the Corporate Transparency Act, is meant to basically peel back the layers of who's owning certain things within the United States, beneficial ownership, transparency, and to make certain that we understand and make sure that that dirty money isn't being filtered through the United States, our banking systems, and impacting our communities.
Where does the dirty money come from, you think? If we were going to think of three top countries or entities that contribute to dirty money in the United States?
You have transnational criminals, and there's certainly a reason why this current administration, President Trump's administration's focus on transnational crime and sort of narco criminals, including even in their own intelligence estimate, which they released in March of this year. They highlight that this was one of the most significant challenges to what they said to U.S. national security, and one of the recommendations in that national intelligence estimate was to strengthen the anti-corruption systems within the United States government like beneficial ownership transparency. So we know it's quite dangerous to let down your guard when you know that there will be foreign interference. And in this case, that foreign interference is money. But it's the money, when it is parked, that comes back to fuel sort of autocratic power. And we know in Russia, this means, like the war in Ukraine, or the continued conflict. So what you really want, and that's why economic statecraft, the use of sanctions, has become much more significant for the United States and partners and allies, Europe and Asia, globally, to try to address challenges, is to try to choke off the resources that fuel conflict.
So basically, we always say follow the money, and that would lead us to, you've said that it's not enough to create anti-corruption bodies. They have to be embedded. What does that actually mean? What makes them stick?
You really need an ecosystem, one, of responsible government and leadership to be able to support that, healthy checks and balances, because when one, and particularly this is the case, could be the case in the United States or elsewhere, you really need to have a balance in the sense of who's providing oversight over what, and sort of closing off the gaps where maybe oversight isn't there. You also need to have a strong civil society that can serve as a key watchdog. There's been a number of times, I'll go back to Ukraine as an example, having worked there, including for a time at USAID. It was often the civil society that were the first to set the alarm when they saw a backslide in commitment to fighting corruption or to democratic reforms. And so it's really necessary to have a healthy civil society, the ability for those communities to be able to engage not only in the capitals of countries, but outside as well. And the same goes for independent media. So when you start to have a breakdown, when there is nobody watching the hen house, and when the person guarding the hen house is the fox itself, you have a problem. Then that weakens governance systems, and more often than not, it's usually citizens of the country that are the ones that are impacted the most by this situation.
You mentioned Tunisia. Let's discuss it. Tunisia as a cautionary tale. Tunisia is the case that keeps coming up lately in expert circles. After the revolution or the Arab Springs, it was the hope. Now it's almost fully authoritarian. The courts are sidelines. Watchdog agencies have been gutted, and it all happened without much noise. How did that happen, do you think? And what are we supposed to take as a lesson from it when we work with vulnerable democracies today?
What was seen by many as so promising to sort of backslide is a reminder of how difficult it is to transition from a non-democracy to a democracy and to maintain that. Particularly not only because of the diverse groups within Tunisia's political system and power factions within, who, some that may have come together at some point to sort of give the country that opening and shot at democracy, to the disintegration over several years politically of not having a cohesive enough group to really give that type of political leadership that's going to be needed. Of the example would be Moldova. It's not exactly the same, but the changes that we've seen over the last 5 years in Moldova have been largely due to having a very stable both president and parliament of the same political party that have shared, I think, a very common vision and direction where that country wants to go, and have been able to move forward on sort of reforms that have needed to happen and have accelerated their pathway to the European Union. Tunisia didn't have a pathway to the EU, which offers, I think, the other lesson, which is when the economic situation in a country doesn't move in the right direction, as the political is moving at the same time, it becomes very difficult, one, to, convince even the public that democracy and this change is the right change. You see a lot of the similarities globally where you have these failures. And more often than not, then you have a reconsolidation of power under an authoritarian. And you're kind of back into this system again. Maybe brief, it's almost like a brief glimpse of blue sky, and then you're coming back down. And I suspect, I'm sure for a lot of people, it's quite disappointing, missed opportunities. But I think if you're in systems that have failed to produce for so long, sometimes you wait for the next attempt to try to go back at this and sort of see if you can do it again. And of course, I think that happens quite often.
You mentioned Lebanon. In Lebanon, the state or the government is trying to function, but there's almost no functioning state for many reasons. But the civil society is still active. Is that where democracy lives now, in the people more than in the institutions?
Yeah, democracy is in the DNA of people globally. And this is go back to modern democracy globally and the advances over the past 250 years. You are right. Civil society in Lebanon is quite resilient in response to the port attack, dysfunctional government, corruption, standing up to provide support, healthcare, food when needed, faces the challenges because of the divisions within the country politically. Certainly that's the case, but they do stand out as incredibly resilient and oftentimes playing a role when government is failing. And you see this in many places globally where you see this type of resilience on the ground. And unfortunately, what you also see is a crackdown. This is both on media and civil society, and making it more difficult for them to do their, to do the things that they want to do. But it can't ultimately be a substitute for the type of political leadership that's needed to have a larger scale effort to transition a country away from a non-functioning, it could be a non-functioning government or a non-functioning democracy, to something that's different, where you can measurably look at the improvements in people's lives and measurably look at, and that's income, freedoms, like schools.
So to summarize what we have discussed so far, we've got Moldova holding on, Ukraine rolling back, also Georgia drifting, Tunisia collapsing, and Lebanon stuck in survival mode. If you were briefing policymakers today, what is the one thing they need to change right now to make sure support for democracy actually works?
Yeah. Well, Joe, I'm going to have one quibble with you, because I would say Ukraine is a success story, a very significant success story. And I think if it's allowed to, if it's not in a conflict with Russia and the Ukrainian people are able to do what they want to do going forward, they'll eventually be a member of the EU. Smart group, brave, incredibly brave, to stand up in the way that they've stood up. And I mentioned to you, I think one of the strongest, most committed civil societies that I have seen, and will be an example, I think, for anyone globally, but not without flaws and not without challenges. And we point that out even in the pieces we've written. Here are the things they need to do, the steps they need to take. But you asked me about, is there something, one singular thing? And one thing that really has been apparent, well, elections don't necessarily always mean that you are that it leads to democracy or that it leads to right governance. So when you look at that, ensuring that you have safe, free, and fair elections, even not just competitive elections in the sense of we will just let, we'll let some opposition run, but they can't win. That's not democracy. That's not an elective system that allows, but enabling the public to be able to vote is particularly important. And it becomes pretty complicated because even we've seen elections, including in the MENA region, where, maybe brought to power some people that, that people might have had concerns about, including within their countries or connected to external partners. But for me, from my perspective is when we wrote about our democracy playbook, we published it in January this year. We talked about the 7 pillars of democracy that you need to protect. The number one pillar was protecting our elections, and of course, we were thinking a lot about here in the United States how important it is, but we know it applies globally. And that if you do not give people a free, fair, and transparent vote, then their voice isn't going to be heard. It doesn't guarantee a democracy. And Joe, if you gave me another 2-3 hours, we could walk through all the different pieces.
We can talk for 3 hours. We're not gonna bore the audience with that. We're gonna give them the most important thing from our conversation.
Yeah, so we pinpoint that election as something that will be particularly focused on in the United States, but globally in 2026, how important it is, and because of not only because of how that vote happens, but because of election security, potential election interference, like we saw, frankly, in Moldova, direct and blatant interference by Russia. We worry about how that impacts countries globally when you have foreign adversaries like China, Russia, North Korea, Iran also interfering. And then because of AI and because of increased levels of disinformation and the impact of social media on how the public is thinking and how media is consumed today, we know that the landscape has shifted. And part of the real challenges for democracies is how to navigate this changed media landscape that you're you're a contributor to, and how are we responding to make sure that people, as I mentioned, it's so important to have accurate information and for people to be able to trust who their leaders are. And
Yeah.
right now, trust in democracies is low all across the world. Trust in institutions is low. And so we have to, we're navigating a new
Whose
world.
fault is that? Just to
Yeah.
mention the trust that is so low when it comes to citizens. I've had a conversation with Dr. Francis Fukuyama about this,
Yeah.
and how is that the low trust from citizens in their institutions and government has led to the rise of populist movements. I want to know, what are the few reasons you think that are leading today to this erosion of trust from citizens toward their governments and institutions?
Yeah. One, I'm going to go right back to, and it shouldn't be discounted, is the impact of media consumption, direct efforts to divide populations, how media is consumed when we're in this media bubble filled with algorithms that sort of basically set the mode of what people are consuming, a lack of sort of interest and sort of really understanding issues and exploring beyond what you're seeing on your social media feed. It's absolutely having an impact on how people view government and governments. Democracies do deliver more than authoritarian countries. There are plenty of studies that show the economic impact of these countries, what people can do within them. Are they healthier in terms of environment? Are they healthier in terms of schools for what children or jobs? There's a reason why a country like Moldova, that was the poorest country in Europe, for many years wants to join the EU economically. It makes a lot of sense when you see how those countries that joined the EU after the collapse of the Soviet Union have done. Those countries have environmentally are ahead. They have democracies. They might not all work perfectly in many ways, but they are in a much better place, both in terms of economic and security, than they were during the days that they were sort of pulled into the Warsaw Pact or Russia's orbit. So I just want to say that making sure, so we have this disinformation component that really is impacting it. And it is also true inequality, which we touched on economically, people feeling disillusioned, feeling like no matter who is in government, they're not sort of reaching me or taking care of the things that I care about. And of course, there's a lot of politicians, political leaders globally. I think it's the other side of populism, which is to say, to address inequality, because a lot of the populist leaders who are out there, it's a lot of what I would say is a lot of lip service to addressing the challenges without really addressing them. Democracy takes 20 times as much work as autocracy does because it's so hard to do it. It's so hard to advance policy, maintain it, fund it. And these systems are more difficult. It's true, it's more difficult. So I think part of it goes to not only the disinformation, inequality, and the other part is incompetence in governance. And I think you would know that if you were in Egypt and you were trying to get your driver's license in Cairo, right? You might where are you going? I understand. I know there's the big city building, but it's difficult sometimes to do that. And when that fails, and I'm saying this because I think there's an expectation that democracy can deliver, and it does.
So those are warning signs. On top of these warnings, you have also warned that fighting corruptions can be used by governments as an excuse to concentrate more power. How do we tell the difference now?
Yeah, it is certainly used. There's this sort of lawfare or the legal system used to by leaders even within democracies to advance their own interests is a real challenge. In countries where you have checks and balances, where you have a judiciary and a legislative branch, the United States has its own unique form. Of course, it's meant to ensure that when one power tries to sort of take more power than it can or should based on constitutions or the law, that these other parts of the system will hold them accountable. In certain systems, that's not happening right now. So the things that you want to do is, of course, you want to expose what's taking place, but you want to hold leaders accountable. And it's more difficult in this information space that we just spoke about. But there is differences between the two, but you need a strong civil society and independent media. You need watchguards to be able to explain this. And you need an interested and educated, civic community and nation to want to sort of understand what's happening, what's right from wrong. Because both sides can claim the other are corrupt. And if the message is so muddied that you don't believe anybody, then you're going to see people that don't come out to vote.
Last question, Jوناثان. If there's one thing we're not paying enough attention to, one trend that could seriously shape where democracy goes next, what is it?
It's certainly the media landscape, the information landscape. We are all watching it, right? Because we can't help but not watch take a look at our feed. And because of the art of disinformation, it's not new. Disinformation and negative campaigning, as we used to call it, as somebody who used to run political campaigns, is been around for forever. But the speed in which somebody can, through AI, deep fakes, through disinformation, sort of an open space with very little control, is something that's quite poisonous to democracy. It's poisonous to the truth. If we can't discern what's real from what's not, I'll give you an example. In Ireland's election, there was a deep fake. It was one of the candidates running for president, and the deep fake was her saying, "I'm not running. I'm making an announcement. I've quit the race." And then they had commentators who'd be like taking you and another colleague in a studio saying, hey, this is, by the way, this is AI as well. It was only one example, but in the U.S. we've seen this. We've been tracking the same type of deepfakes and AI, around the globe. So the rush and the speed of technology globally in democracy, because we know that technology can be, on one hand, it can be a positive, but it also can be used in a negative way. And of course, in the hands of those that do not support democracy, don't care about it, not interested in the truth, you're doing things that impact the public good. And that also means when you see the people who you want, the experts that you really want to be there to address the deep challenges like climate change. How many people in the MENA region are impacted by climate change, migration? There's a reason why people have been leaving in droves, over years too, because of that, because of all these issues, the inability of governance or conflict. So I just want to say this is a spark and a space for us to be thinking hard about what we want to see in terms of how to address this deep challenge, which threatens democracy globally. And of course, in the hands of populist authoritarians, it's a weapon.
And definitely talking about how AI and deepfake will and is changing elections and the race of elections. I think this should be a whole conversation, a whole different episode with you, probably. Joonathán Katz, thanks for joining me and for giving us a real look at what's actually happening behind the headlines. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to speak to you.